The twin moons of Zelthar 4 hung low in the sky, casting a ghostly silver glow over the sprawling capital city of Zeltharim. Towering spires of organic crystal pulsed with faint bioluminescence, illuminating the vast plaza where thousands of alien dignitaries gathered in hushed anticipation. Ambassador Ryan Carter adjusted the high collar of his ceremonial attire, an elegant black tunic embroidered with gold-threaded sigils gifted to him by the Zelthari High Council. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense, a mixture of citrus and something faintly metallic, seeping through the towering archways of the Grand Temple of Vorith. This was supposed to be a simple diplomatic visit, an honor extended to humanity as a gesture of goodwill after years of careful negotiations. The Zelthari were an ancient and enigmatic species, humanoid in form but possessing a strikingly ethereal presence. Their skin shimmered with iridescent hues, shifting subtly with their emotions, and their eyes, large, multifaceted, and deep as the void, reflected the grandeur of a species that had ruled this sector of the galaxy for millennia. Ryan's mission was straightforward: attend the wedding of Princess Saris, daughter of the High Matriarch, and forge diplomatic bonds through cultural exchange. Humanity's presence in the wider galactic community was still relatively new, and every opportunity to solidify alliances was critical. But as he stood among a crowd of towering Zelthari nobles, he couldn't shake the unease prickling at the back of his mind. A procession of attendants, draped in flowing garments woven from metallic fibers, moved gracefully through the temple's main corridor, their arms raised in synchronized reverence. The high priest, a statuesque figure with 4 elongated arms and an elaborate headdress adorned with glowing gemstones, stepped forward. The gathered assembly fell into a reverent silence as the sacred rites began. Ryan did his best to follow along. He had studied the customs extensively, but there were nuances to Zelthari traditions that no human could fully grasp. Still, he nodded respectfully as an attendant approached him, holding an ornate goblet filled with a thick, opalescent liquid. He had been told that participation in certain rituals was a sign of respect, so he lifted the goblet and took a measured sip. The liquid was cool and viscous, coating his tongue with an unfamiliar yet not unpleasant taste. He bowed slightly to the attendant, who responded with a pleased tilt of their head before retreating. The ceremony progressed in a hypnotic rhythm of chants, glowing sigils, and ritualistic movements. Princess Saris entered, her presence commanding yet poised. She was taller than Ryan, with flowing silver-blue hair cascading down her back in braided loops, woven with strands of bioluminescent filaments. Her gown was an intricate masterpiece of woven light and shimmering fabric, shifting colors in response to her movements. She regarded him with a gaze that held the weight of expectation, though he did not yet understand why. At her side was Lord Kael'Zoreth, the intended groom. He stood rigid, his expression unreadable, though his shifting skin betrayed flickers of deep indigo, a sign of unease or conflict. Ryan had met Kael before, briefly, and while their interactions had been polite, he sensed an undercurrent of something more complicated beneath the noble's formal demeanor. The high priest raised all 4 hands, signaling the culmination of the ritual. A solemn hush fell over the temple as Saris and Kael knelt before the great altar, where an intricate artifact pulsed with a rhythmic light. The priest spoke in the ancient tongue of the Zelthari, his voice reverberating through the chamber. Then, something unexpected happened. The priest gestured toward Ryan. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Ryan hesitated, glancing around, unsure if he had misunderstood. An attendant stepped forward, offering him an ornate ceremonial dagger with an intricately carved hilt. A symbolic gesture, he assumed, perhaps a way to signify humanity's respect for this union. Not wanting to offend, he accepted the dagger and mimicked the bow he had observed earlier. The murmurs intensified. The priest's eyes gleamed with something unreadable as he continued the ritual, this time addressing Ryan directly. It was only then that he noticed Saris watching him with an unreadable expression, her iridescent skin flickering through a spectrum of hues. Kael, however, was staring at Ryan with something bordering on alarm. A sinking realization settled over him as he processed the words the priest had spoken. By accepting the dagger and performing the ritualistic gesture, he had unknowingly fulfilled the sacred act of consent. Ryan Carter, human ambassador, had just been declared the groom. The silence that followed was suffocating. Cale shot to his feet, his voice a low, controlled growl in his native tongue. Saris remained kneeling, her gaze locked onto Ryan, studying him with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. The gathered nobles exchanged hushed words, their skin rippling with conflicting emotions. Ryan took a slow breath, forcing himself to remain composed. Panicking would accomplish nothing. He turned to the high priest, raising a hand in what he hoped was a gesture of clarification. "There's been a mistake," he said, his voice measured. "I did not intend." The high priest lifted a hand, silencing him with an air of finality. "Intent is irrelevant, honored guest. The ritual is binding. The union is sealed." Ryan felt the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him. His mind raced through possible solutions, but every scenario led to the same conclusion. Backing out now would be a catastrophic insult. The Zelthari held tradition above all else. To reject this marriage would not only disgrace Saris but could shatter diplomatic relations between their peoples. Saris rose to her feet, standing tall before him. She studied him for a long moment before finally speaking, her voice smooth yet layered with an unreadable depth. "You are now bound by sacred law," she said. "Do you accept the honor that has been bestowed upon you?" Her words were deliberate. A test, a warning, an invitation. Ryan swallowed hard. He had come to witness a wedding, not to become the groom. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. He lifted his gaze, meeting hers, and chose his words carefully. What happens next? The halls of the royal palace stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of arching corridors illuminated by walls of pulsating crystal. Ryan Carter followed in silence, his footsteps absorbed by the soft, organic flooring beneath him. Princess Saris walked ahead with measured grace, her luminous gown shifting hues with each step. Behind them, a retinue of attendants and guards trailed at a respectful distance, their unreadable expressions adding to the oppressive weight pressing down on Ryan's chest. He was married, or at least that's what the Zelthari believed. His mind reeled at the absurdity of it, at how a simple diplomatic visit had spiraled into something that now held interstellar consequences. Every attempt to protest had been met with the same response. The ritual was sacred, binding, unbreakable. To reject it now would be a grave dishonor, not just to Saris but to the entirety of the Zelthari dominion. Saris led him into a private chamber, dismissing the attendants with a subtle flick of her hand. The doors sealed behind them, their crystalline surface shifting into an opaque barrier. The chamber was vast yet intimate, dominated by a central platform that resembled a nest of woven light and translucent fabric. Soft bioluminescent flora adorned the walls, casting a twilight glow over the space. A ceremonial bonding chamber, Ryan realized with a slow exhale. Saris turned to face him, her expression inscrutable. "You seem unwell." Ryan let out a breathless chuckle. "You could say that." Her gaze remained steady, the colors shifting across her skin too fluid for him to interpret. He had read about the Zelthari ability to communicate emotion through bioluminescence, but he had yet to grasp its subtleties. That, and his heart was still hammering from the sheer absurdity of his predicament. "You do not wish this union," she stated, not as a question but as a fact. He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's not that simple." Her head tilted slightly. "It is the simplest of truths. You did not come here seeking a mate. You were unaware of the ritual's significance." Ryan exhaled, forcing himself to focus. "That's true. But what happens if I refuse? What are the consequences?" She studied him, then moved past him to the large window overlooking the capital city. From this height, the streets shimmered like rivers of molten sapphire, the energy coursing through the city's infrastructure creating a breathtaking display. "Our people honor tradition above all else," she said. "To break a sacred bond once sealed would be an act of great dishonor. It would be seen as a rejection not just of me, but of the dominion itself." She turned back to him, her expression cool. There are those who would seize such an insult as justification for conflict. Ryan ran a hand over his face. A diplomatic disaster. That was what this was. A fragile alliance, barely established, now teetering on the edge of collapse because of a cultural misinterpretation. He had to think carefully. His role as ambassador meant navigating treacherous political waters. And now, more than ever, one wrong move could have dire consequences. "I'm not here to dishonor you," he said carefully, "or to jeopardize relations between our people. But this wasn't my choice, and I need to understand exactly what's expected of me." Saris regarded him for a long moment before stepping closer. "The bond is not merely symbolic. It is a union of standing, of duty." Her voice softened slightly, though her posture remained poised. "You are now part of the royal line, bound to our laws and responsibilities. You will be expected to uphold your role." He swallowed. "Which means," she studied him, "you must remain at my side." The weight of those words settled over him like a crushing force. His diplomatic mission had already changed irreversibly. But now, he wasn't just a representative of humanity. He was a figure of political consequence in an alien empire. He forced himself to meet her gaze, searching for any sign of resentment, of resistance, but found only measured patience. "If I do this," he said slowly, "if I fulfill whatever role this requires, what does that mean for us?" Something flickered across her expression, too fleeting for him to name. "It means we must learn to trust one another." He let out a slow breath. That was, perhaps, the best he could hope for. The following days passed in a blur of formal introductions and ceremonial obligations. Ryan found himself paraded before the royal court, presented as Saris's bonded mate before an assembly of nobles whose reactions ranged from quiet acceptance to barely concealed outrage. He caught the disapproving stares of Lord Kael'Zoreth more than once, the spurned suitor's demeanor bristling with barely contained resentment. Navigating this new reality was an exercise in restraint. Ryan was expected to accompany Saris to all political functions, to stand beside her as if their union had been long planned rather than an accidental misunderstanding. The more time he spent with her, the more he began to understand the weight she carried on her own. Saris was no mere princess to be paraded about. She was a leader, a strategist, a figure of authority whose words shaped the course of the Dominion. In court, she commanded the room with quiet precision, her every statement measured and deliberate. Yet in private, Ryan glimpsed the exhaustion beneath the regal exterior, the moments where the weight of expectation threatened to press too heavily upon her. One evening, as they returned from a grueling political summit, Ryan found her standing on the balcony of their shared quarters, gazing out at the city with an expression he could not quite decipher. He hesitated before stepping beside her. "You carry a lot on your shoulders," he said. She did not turn to him, but after a pause, she replied, "It is the burden of leadership." Ryan studied her. "And does this arrangement make that burden lighter or heavier?" At that, she turned to him, and for the first time, there was something almost vulnerable in her gaze. "I do not yet know." A comfortable silence stretched between them. Ryan exhaled and leaned on the railing. "I don't want to be an obstacle in your life, Saris. I may not have chosen this, but I want to understand it. I want to understand you." Something shifted in her then, the faintest trace of amusement flickering through her bioluminescent skin. "You are an anomaly, Ryan Carter." He let out a soft chuckle. "I've been called worse." For the first time since this entire ordeal had begun, Saris allowed herself to smile, small, fleeting, but genuine. But the moment of peace did not last. A sudden explosion rocked the palace, the shockwave sending tremors through the ground. Guards burst into the chamber, weapons drawn, voices raised in alarm. Ryan turned sharply, instinct kicking in as he braced for what was to come. Saris's expression hardened. "We are under attack." Ryan's stomach tightened. There was no more time to adjust, no more time to question his place in this world. The game had changed, and now it was a matter of survival. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and the sharp tang of ionized energy. Alarms blared through the palace halls, their shrill wail cutting through the chaos as Ryan Carter sprinted after Saris. The once pristine corridors of bioluminescent crystal were now marred by scorch marks and the occasional body of a fallen guard. "Who's attacking?" Ryan shouted over the noise, his heart pounding as they rounded a corner. Saris barely spared him a glance. "Not now. We must reach the war chamber." Ryan clenched his jaw but followed without argument. Whatever was happening, she understood it better than he did. Right now, survival was the priority. As they neared the command center, 2 Zelthari guards flanked them, their sleek armor glinting in the flickering emergency lights. They moved with precision, scanning for threats, weapons drawn and ready. The doors to the war chamber slid open with a sharp hiss, revealing a sprawling circular room dominated by a holographic display of the city. Ryan took in the scene with growing dread. The once peaceful capital was now a battlefield. Dark shapes moved in the sky, sleek, angular ships descending like predatory birds. Explosions rippled through the streets below, sending civilians scattering. Defensive batteries lit up the night with bursts of emerald plasma. But for every enemy vessel shot down, more took its place. Lord Kael'Zoreth stood at the center of the room, his expression grim as he coordinated defensive efforts with the high-ranking officers surrounding him. His gaze snapped to Ryan and Saris as they entered, his lips pressing into a thin line. "This is your doing," he spat, voice laced with accusation. Ryan stiffened. "Excuse me?" Kael's bioluminescence flickered with a deep, stormy hue. "The attack began not long after your arrival. You expect us to believe this is coincidence?" Saris stepped between them, her tone sharp. "Enough, Kael. We do not have time for baseless accusations." Kael's glare did not soften, but he did not argue. Instead, he turned back to the holographic display, gesturing to a cluster of red markers closing in on the palace. "The enemy forces are targeting key infrastructure. They know our weaknesses." He exhaled sharply. This was planned. Ryan frowned, stepping closer to the display. "Who are they?" "The Mirvac," Saris said, her voice heavy with something unreadable. Ryan searched his memory. The Mirvac were a rogue faction, a militaristic splinter group that had long opposed the Dominion's rule. Reports painted them as extremists, unwilling to engage in diplomacy, favoring force over words. He had never encountered them directly, but he had heard the stories. "They want the throne," Saris continued, her gaze dark, "and they will burn this world to claim it." Kael's expression was unreadable, but his stance was rigid with barely contained tension. "Our forces are holding, but they will not last forever. The palace defenses are strong, but they are not impenetrable." Ryan studied the map, mind racing. "You need a counteroffensive." Kael scoffed. "And what would the human ambassador know of war?" Ryan turned to him, unflinching. "I know that sitting here and waiting for them to breach our walls is a death sentence." Kael's glare intensified, but Saris lifted a hand before he could retort. She studied Ryan carefully. "You have a plan?" Ryan hesitated. He wasn't a general. He wasn't even supposed to be here, but he had trained for crisis scenarios. He had studied tactics from every major galactic power. And right now, doing nothing wasn't an option. "They're focusing on critical points," he said, pointing to the red markers. "That means they expect a war of attrition. But if we hit them from an unexpected angle, target their command ships instead of their ground forces, we might disrupt their coordination." Kael folded his arms. "A bold strategy. Risky." Ryan met his gaze evenly. "So is sitting here and waiting to die." Saris studied the map, considering. Then she nodded. "Deploy the aerial strike teams. Focus fire on the command vessels. If we sever the head, the body will falter." Kael hesitated, but at Saris's unwavering stare, he inclined his head. "As you command." Orders were relayed. The chamber buzzed with renewed energy as officers coordinated deployments. Ryan exhaled, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. He had no illusions, this battle was far from won. But at least now they had a chance. The attack lasted through the night. Ryan and Saris remained in the war chamber, watching as the battle unfolded in real time. The strike teams engaged the Mirvac command ships, weaving through enemy fire with precision. The first vessel fell within the hour, its destruction sending a ripple of confusion through the enemy ranks. By the time the second command ship was neutralized, the Mirvac formations began to fracture. At dawn, the last of the enemy forces retreated, vanishing into the void as swiftly as they had come. A heavy silence settled over the war chamber. The battle was over. The city still stood. Saris turned to Ryan, her expression unreadable. "You saved this world tonight." Ryan shook his head. "I just made a suggestion. Your people did the fighting." She regarded him for a long moment before speaking. "And yet you chose to stand with us. That is not something I will forget." Kale approached, his usual disdain subdued. He studied Ryan carefully, then gave a slow nod. Not quite acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of something else. Ryan exhaled, exhaustion creeping into his bones. He had come to this world as an outsider, an ambassador, a man caught in a situation beyond his control. But now, as he stood among them, he realized something had changed. He was no longer just a visitor. He was part of this world now, bound to it in ways he had never anticipated. And whatever came next, he would face it, not as a stranger but as one of them.